Whether you're an employee or a business owner, this work environment of, people going back into the office or working remotely, this is a hot topic right now, especially, because a lot of employers are saying it's time for everybody to come back into the office. But you may be resisting that. Maybe you're an employee and you're like, oh, I really don't want to do that. I want to really work remotely. I want to find those companies that want to have me work remotely. So we're going to be talking about remote work. We're going to be talking about the future of work. We're going to be talking about leadership, how to step into your leadership or how to use your leadership skills that you currently have. Maybe you're not a leader. You don't see yourself as a leader. Maybe you're not in management. But there are leadership skills that you have that you can implement into what you're doing. Having that knowledge of the leadership skills that you do have helps you better show up and also be able to be more intentional with what you're doing. So I want to welcome Cecilia Dahl. She's the founder of the Remote Leadership Lab. And Cecilia, before we get on with the interview, I would love for you to introduce yourself and tell us why it is that you do what you do.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me, Linda. I'm really passionate about the future of work and working remotely. And as an entrepreneur since I was 30 years old, which is, I hate to say it, decades ago now, I started a company way back before there were even iPhones, and we moved into a remote work environment. And I found it was very challenging at first. We did it for financial reasons because we honestly didn't have the funds as a startup to pay for office space everywhere that we were. And I initially was really terrified about it. I thought this is going to be crazy. And I think I have a feeling what I was going through was probably what people felt like when the pandemic came and they were suddenly remote going, deer in the headlights, right? Yeah, and it was a lot of lessons learned, but at the end of the day, it was the best thing that ever happened to my business. Once we learned how to function in a remote environment, we realized we were saving a lot on overhead. We could be engaged, productive. We could build community, and people became really passionate about the work that they were doing, and they had flexibility, more time with their families, and working remote allowed me to tap some of the best talent out there because I wasn't restricted to a commutable distance from my office. So since that time, I've been very passionate about it. I would always say to my team, I don't care where you are, as long as you're producing the work. And I recognize it's not for everyone, but once COVID hit and everybody was sent home, I started to hear from people about how to make this work. And I realized a lot more than I had previously, that there were so many lessons on the leadership side, not so much even on the worker side. It really is about the leadership, how you lead and run those companies, and the different set of skills that you need. And it's something I've become so passionate about, and it's why I founded the Remote Leadership Lab.
I love that. I love how you moved into it years ago. I used to own a virtual assistant company about 25 years ago, before virtual assistant was even a word that people talked about. But it's interesting how, we're able to take those skills that we learned from there and then bring them into the remote world ourselves. Yeah. But then I love how you're helping people to learn how to make the most of those remote situations, whether it's the employee or the employer. So let's talk about from the employer perspective. Why should an employer want to have remote work and to keep doing that? Aside from, let me just leave it at that question right there. Yeah. Why should an employer want to keep remote work as an option?
Yeah. Well, there's a number of reasons, and I'll start with one of the things that I just mentioned, and that is that when you are able to function effectively in a remote workspace, you open up the possibility of getting talent from a global pool. There are so many talented people out there who wouldn't be even a candidate for you if they had restrictions on where they could live, if you required them to come into the office. So that's one, access to a global pool of talent. And the top talent anywhere in the world is going to work remote if that's what they want to do, because they can find the remote job. So if there are people out there who are top talent and they want to work remotely and you're trying to get them to come and work for you, but you don't allow it, they're not going to come. And that's going to be the side effect of not being willing to work in a remote environment. The other thing is that you do save a lot on overhead because of the office expense that you don't have to pay. I mentioned this was one of the reasons we did it, because we just couldn't afford the offices,
Right.
right? So you save on the office space. The other thing is you have the opportunity to expand your operating hours because you can have a global team, so you can service customers across multiple time zones. And the last thing that I'll say is I really do think companies benefit from diversity, and where you can hire from different continents or different countries, or get people with different cultural backgrounds and communication backgrounds. I think you're enriching the abilities of the company to grow, innovate, come up with new ideas. So there's a lot of benefits to considering a strategic move to a remote workspace. And I say that meaning that it is a strategic move, because flipping the switch and sending people home, like what happened in COVID, is not an effective way to make that move. It requires planning and intention and new skills.
Yeah. So coming out of COVID, is there a way for employers that, because like you mentioned, you're flipping the switch, right? COVID forced the world to do this, unless you were a service industry. And even then there were challenges that they faced. But as far as those who can work from home, work remotely, my company, Action Takers Publishing, like we're all remote, every single one of us. I'm in San Diego, or my partner is in Connecticut. And then we have people from different cities and different countries around the world that are on our team. And like you said, we found people that really did a great job in this particular area. And so we connected with them and made that happen. But what do you recommend for employers who are sitting there, like they have this office space? Okay, well, I have this office space, I don't want to waste it, but what do you recommend for them to do to be able to, maybe they move out of that lease slowly or something, I don't know, but then they how do they incorporate so that they can have their employees work from home, feel good about it, like the employer, feel good about what they're doing, and make sure that they're getting the best work out of their people?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's in terms of the physical office space, it really depends on where people are, whether you own a building or lease a building, and certainly there are ways to move out of those situations. For anyone that is considering a move, and there are companies that are remote first, and then there are companies that are hybrid. So you're giving people options, and that's always an idea too, right? Because some people
Right.
want the office space, some people want to be remote, and in leading in a remote or hybrid space brings the same type of challenges. So whether people are partially or wholly, so you might hang on to that space and give people options, and just get the talent where you can get it and focus on the people rather than where the people are. Some people may be in your space. When you're making a move to a remote work environment, though, the real strategy comes less in sort of the physical location, and it really comes with building connections with people, inspiring them to buy into the mission and values of the business, giving them the tools that they need, and keeping them engaged with the organization. The other piece of it is, as you had said, how do you make sure that they're doing what they need to be doing? There's a little bit of a shift in mindset here, because what it forces you to do, and this is the great thing, is it forces you to hire and evaluate people based on the work that they're producing and not the number of hours that they're sitting in the office. So you really hone in on, what am I expecting from each person to contribute, and how is that moving my business forward, and less about, is that person here at 9 until 5 or 6 or 7 or whatever the company requires them to be there for, right? So it actually sharpens your skills in terms of understanding what you're expecting from people, and keeps you really tuned into the results. You're looking at the results all the time. So there's a whole new set of skills that need to happen. The other piece that I'll mention, and this is where we do a lot of work in Remote Leadership Lab, is that as you start to grow new talent into the organization and they become leaders and they become managers, they don't have that same traditional mentorship that previous generations might have had, where you're sitting in a space where you can hear the leaders talking and you can see how they're leading, and get that whole training by observation of how to become a good, solid leader. So training at all levels of management is really essential in a remote team. Those leadership skills, those core leadership skills that often people are just promoted and expected to sort of figure out in an
Right.
office space. I call it co-located, where everybody is in the same space. In a co-located space where you kind of have support and you have other managers, there's a gap, right? So you have to invest in making sure that these people have the right skills in their toolbox to produce an effective and collaborative and engaged remote workspace where people are communicating effectively and getting results. It's totally possible, but it's a different focus on the leadership training.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It immediately came to mind is my dad. My dad was a computer programmer back in the day when they had these big mainframes and they were kept in these cold rooms, like 20 degrees. And he was so good at what he did. He was project oriented, and they would give an assignment for the team to do. And this was back in the day, everybody had to come into the office every day, 5 days a week.
Yeah.
And so they would give the team an assignment and they would say, okay, this is going to take us 3 years to do. There were huge projects that he was working on in a hospital doing lab tests. These are the programs that he created, lab test programs. So pretty cool, right? But my dad was not a team player, and he would go off and do his own thing, and he would finish the project himself in 3 months instead of 3 years. And so because of his valuable skill, they never fired him when he would leave every day at 12, go to the bar, get drunk, and then come home drunk. Yeah, this was a daily occurrence for my dad. And so, but like you mentioned, so that, his skill was there. He was able to work by himself. And so why not let somebody like that do what they do best? And then you get a greater output. Is if he was forced to work with the team, they might not have had the same result.
Yeah. Well, I think,
Interesting.
everybody's different. And I think identifying the strengths and using strengths of the people on your team is essential. I don't advocate, though, I will say, I think your father is a very unique circumstance.
Yeah,
And I
definitely.
don't advocate for having anybody work in isolation. It really is. And the reason for that is because normal people who might not be engineers or computer programmers, by the way, my dad, also an engineer, also kind of a loner, but
Right.
most people, to become really effective in your positions at work, need to collaborate. They need that engagement. They need that connection. And that's why a lot of businesses during COVID, when everything went to a dispersed remote space, saw productivity drop, because communication lagged, because there wasn't trust being built and people didn't know each other. Productivity lagged because the tools weren't in place and the structures weren't in place, right? And it was one of these things where it was just shock. And here we are. Okay, we made the best of it. And the management was saying, this will be over, in a year, this will be over in 2 years. And meantime, the employees were saying, I kind of like this. I feel like it's okay, right? And they started to figure out, making connections and such. So I think in general, people are going to either want to be in the same place with their employees, or they're going to want to be remote. And if you're looking to expand your talent pool and allow people to work remotely, I think that the core of it is you have to do things differently. You can't really, in a normal situation, let people just go and be in isolation. You have to bring them in. You have to bring them in and create that inspiration, capture their hearts with the mission of the business, and get them to come to work for reasons beyond just their paycheck, right? They want to be there because they're part of something, because they see how impactful what they're doing is to the goal of the business, and they're sold on the mission and the goal of the business. That's when they start to feel like they're part of something bigger, and they become part of that community, and they'll go the extra mile. And it is very much, just to kind of tap back to what you said, it is very much a little bit of a shift of mindset into looking at what people are producing and the results that people are bringing to you, and hiring for the results and not the hours.
Yeah. Now, what came to mind when you were speaking there was, like looking at the remote work versus the in office work. And I think a lot of employers want to make sure that it's fair, right? So for example, I say that for an example of an employer who, like, everybody was working from home because that's the way it had to be. Now they're like, okay, let's do 2 days a week in the office. Everybody's required, mandatory to have everybody work 2 days in the office. But there could be somebody else who's like, but I like to work in the office. And so maybe they go into the office every day, 5 days a week, because they like that. I actually know people who love to be in the office, whether a bunch of people are around or not. They just like, maybe they work better in that office environment where they can focus or something. But let's talk about, like, what do you believe is fair? I have my own opinion, which I'm going to share as well. But what do you believe is fair as from the employer's standpoint? What is fair for the employees? Is it to make them all come in a certain number of days a week? Is it fair for them to say everybody come in every day? Is it fair for them to say everybody work from home? Is it fair for them to say you get to decide? What's fair?
Yeah. I think what's fair is for a company to decide how they want their culture to be. And then when they hire people, get people who want to be part of that culture. Right. So, and the other thing that I'll say is also fair to give people the opportunity to work in a space where they themselves are most productive and where they themselves can feel connected, can feel inspired, can feel like they're really contributing and contribute to the team. So what happens is every business is going to build and evolve into its own culture, and people are going to choose whether that's the culture that they want for themselves. You're 100% right. There are a lot of people who want to be in that office space. So giving your team a choice of having a space to go to, whether it's a shared office space or whether it's a building, and if they want to move, that's fine. Or saying, if you're a contributing team member and you're producing, we're okay with you being remote. That's fine too. I also do advocate, by the way, for anybody who has remote teams, that from time to time, you do need to get together in person. You have to have that ability to connect. I just came back from speaking at a global conference for one of my clients that is a remote first company. They have offices in Canada, UK, US, all over, Australia, right? So they're all spread apart. Once a year, they bring everybody together. And it's this incredible time of bonding and developing trust and cohesion, and they train and they learn. Now, they do also chat on these kinds of calls on video calls all the time, but this is a time when you can really cement people into the culture. And I think it is really about defining who your company is and what it means to work for your company, whether you want to be in a shared space or at home, providing the options for people to be their very best and to stay connected and inspired. That's what I think is the right way to address it.
I agree with that as far as the aspect of, if somebody wants to work from home and works great from home, they're doing the output, they're, producing the work, then they should get to choose to work from home. I don't think fairness is like we talk about, with diversity, equity, and inclusion. Equity and inclusion doesn't mean that everybody does the same thing, in my opinion. It means that we get to choose because we're individuals and we have different likes and dislikes, and we work better in different ways than others. And so I think, like you said, figuring out, like, what is the best way for that person? What do they like the best? What are they giving if they're working from home and they're not producing results, then maybe you're like, you know what, you need to come into the office. But otherwise, you don't punish everybody else and say that person's not pulling their weight. So we need to make everybody come into the office because it needs to be fair for everybody. So that's my opinion on that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and not every role is compatible with remote work. I think what we
Yeah.
saw in the pandemic was, everybody kind of had to go, not everybody, but most people had to go remote. And it did unlock a whole new layer of roles because of technologies that have advanced and tools that came about where more roles are now compatible with potentially being remote, but not every single role is. So it really depends on what kind of company you have and what kind of structure and culture you want to have. What kind of real estate you're tied to, if you can get out of it. I think the thing that we're seeing a lot of is that businesses are saying remote teams aren't creative, remote teams aren't productive, remote teams don't know how to communicate. And a lot of the finger pointing is going out at the employees. And what I see when I start to work with the leadership is that it's really not about the employees. It's about how you lead those employees, how people need to develop new leadership skills. Because if you choose to have remote teams, It is about how you work to engage them, the tools that you give them to communicate, how much community, trust, engagement, and productivity you can support as a leader. And the other thing is it's leaders at all levels of the organization. So younger managers, newer managers, they need core basic skill development and a little extra because it's a little different when you're working remotely. So there are some nuances that happen in remote environments that people need to understand in order for them to be super effective.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction there too. Now you talk about leadership and, leadership within, like, everybody has leadership skills. I know we talked about that a little bit before we went online. But so everybody has leadership skills, whether you are in management or in leadership, there's still leadership skills that you have. So let's talk about this. What does this mean that everybody has leadership skills?
Well, I think the thing is this, anybody can be a leader no matter what your job is. I don't know if inherently everybody does have leadership skills, but you don't have to have a job as a manager or a leader to have leadership skills. Leadership can be in your day to day. And you mentioned the distinction, management versus leadership. And really, someone explained it to me once in a really clear way. Leadership is about the people and inspiring the people and motivating people to do their very best. Management is managing the tasks that those people do and making sure that people can do them effectively. So think of leadership as the people and management as the tasks, and you'll see that differentiation. Leadership can be about taking risks. It can be about how you handle yourself in difficult situations. It can be about the choices you make. Any single day, you can show up as a leader in your personal life or in your professional life, whether you're a leader or not. And that's the difference that whether you're in a leadership role in your organization or not. And that's that distinction that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, interesting, right? Because you can be a great leader, but not a great manager. You can be a great manager, but not a great leader, or you could be both, or you can not be both.
That's right. That's right. Some people can inspire people to do amazing things, but couldn't really manage them to get through the work week and get their tasks done. They are two different things. And I mean, they're almost two sides of the same coin, I guess, in a way, because many people, especially the ones that I work with in the remote leadership lab, tend to be mid-level or newer managers and leaders who are needing basic experience or don't get that mentorship that they need. So they're growing into their roles and they're managing and leading. And so when I start Remote Leadership Lab and I have that differentiator there, it's a little bit of a surprise to people because they don't realize that part of their management job now on a remote team means you have to inspire people and connect them with the purpose and the goal and give them that lighthouse, that beacon to work towards and a reason to show up beyond just getting paid.
That's for sure. I love that. Now we're talking to Cecilia Dahl. She's one of the authors in the book Leadership Unveiled, Women Leading with Impact. You can get your copy of the book plus free gifts from our authors at actiontakerspublishing.com/unveiled. That's UNVEILED. Again, that's actiontakerspublishing.com/unveiled. And your chapter in this book is titled, let's see here, I'm going to pull it up here. Roots of Resilience, Leadership Lessons from Immigrant Parents. You want to talk a little bit about your chapter without giving it away?
Sure, yeah. It was interesting because I was talking to a woman who's involved with this book when I first started to become part of the project. And she asked me a very simple question: what made you a leader? And I reflected on the fact that I wasn't really sure. And I started to think back about who were the influencers in my life and my leadership and the lessons that I had learned. And I realized that even though my parents have never held any kind of management or leadership roles, they were immigrants at a very young age, came to the country in the 60s and forged a new life. They built something from nothing. And when I look back at their experiences and how that impacted me, I realized that there were a number of very valuable leadership lessons that they passed along to me unknowingly. And I explore that with them. I interviewed them both extensively for this chapter and talked about things that I knew that I had experienced and how did that impact them, and did they agree that, I saw this as leadership, and how could we sort of pull this all together. And I pulled together I think there are 4 or 5 really significant lessons in leadership that I was able to attribute back to the lessons that I learned from my parents through their immigrant journey, and the day-to-day decisions that they made and the risks that they took and what they had to do to build a life here in the United States.
I love this. I think it's a great idea for us to reflect and look at that. As I mentioned earlier, I had a volatile, abusive alcoholic household that I grew up in. And so when I look back at my past, I look at a lot of times, not as much now as in the past, but I would look at and have a lot of blame, right? So what if I were to instead flip that and see what were the things that I learned, which I have done this, with my parents. What are the things that I've learned? And I've gone through the forgiveness and the gratitude and all these things. But like, what did I actually learn from those situations? Whether it was a good environment that you grew up in or a bad environment, there are things that you learned that you take with you today. And so you can attribute them to that environment and say, here's what I got from this. Here's how it benefited me by living in that kind of situation, because there were a lot of things I gained from being in that situation that I'm able to pull into my present life, and my future as well. And then able to impart that to my own kids. And so, yeah, I love that you did that. You said you talked to your parents, right? You actually sat down and talked to them.
I did. I have to say, I admire that perspective from you a lot, because I think sometimes it can be hard to reflect back, but going back and pulling out the positive is really great. And
I'll tell you, it was really hard. The hardest part of it, though, was deciding to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was the hardest part, because I had so much just hate and vitriol for my situation that I didn't want to see anything good out of it. And then I had to make a decision, and I did. One day I said, you know what, I'm going to look at it and I'm going to see what are the good things that came out of that situation. And that was the hardest decision to make.
Yeah. Sometimes a lesson that you learn tells you what not to do ever,
Exactly.
and you grow.
Great lessons.
Yeah, they are great lessons. And I know, when I did interview my parents, as you just mentioned, I went to them and I said, this is how I want to write this chapter. I wanted their permission, and I wanted to share it with them and go through that. And they were both my father was very resistant at first, because he never saw himself as a leader, because he never had a management job. So he was like, I was never a manager. I was never in leadership. And I was trying to explain to him that that's not really what it was about. My mom grabbed onto it right away. She loved it. And we went through this discussion together over weeks of, I see them every 2 weeks. So I'd go and I just ask a little bit more and remember the things that I remembered from growing up and learning their perspectives on things as well. It was a really fun project. And I hope that that's reflected in the chapters for people who buy the book and choose to read it. I hope that comes across.
Yeah, definitely. So you can get your copy of Leadership Unveiled by going to actiontakerspublishing.com/unveiled. If you've liked what Cecilia has shared, and you thought, like, you know what, I would like to be in a book as well, then we have an opportunity for you. Just go to actiontakerspublishing.com. We have a lot of different collaborative books that we're working on, where you just sit down and you write one chapter. It's a great way to get started, a great way to tell a small snippet of your story and get your message out there. So just go to actiontakerspublishing.com and check it out to see what else we have to offer. So Cecilia, let's wrap this up with any other thoughts that you have for those who are watching this today.
Yeah, I will say the future of work is here, and we should be embracing it. Technology is advancing every day. Don't run from it. Don't hide from it. Explore your leadership. And if you want support with your remote leadership or your teams, or know someone that does, check me out at the Remote Leadership Lab, and I'd be happy to talk some more.
There you go. Yeah, remoteleadershiplab.com. Head on over there. Do you offer consultations with people?
Yeah, there's a calendar link on my website where you can book a 20-minute call right there. And that's a free consultation. So please take advantage.
So tell us, who would be somebody that would be good to collect on this link and to make that 20-minute call? Where are they right now in their position in life or their business?
I work with companies. So if you're a business leader and your company or your corporation has remote teams, I would be brought in by the company and I would take cohorts of leaders from the company through a 16-week program. We work together. It's a series of lectures. There's a challenge that each person has with every module. Then they present their challenges and get feedback, and we grow and plan together, and we build our toolbox together over 16 weeks. And it's a certificate program as well. So I work primarily, I wouldn't be something for an individual who was looking for coaching. I am working B2B. So I'm looking for companies that want to bring someone in to support their leaders who are managing remote teams.
And is there a minimum number of employees or cohorts? Like how would somebody know if they're a fit for that?
I think that the lowest number in a cohort that I've had is 4. And I try to keep the cohorts a little small because of the presentation element, but I do have a more asynchronous model with some of my larger clients. So we can explore that. But I would say a minimum, I would say at a time to make it effective would be 4 people.
Okay. And what about somebody who they're like, I'm not there yet, but I want to be there? Do you have options for them to at least like to figure out how to get there? Because maybe they want to get to that, 4
Yeah.
cohort. Like how do you, are that
Yeah.
something you're able to help them with?
Certainly, I offer consulting services as well, and I do that with a number of
Okay.
clients. So if they just want to reach out to me and have a conversation, we'll see how we can work together.
Okay, awesome. Go to remoteleadershiplab.com, connect with her, make an appointment, get on her calendar and see how she can help you. Thank you so much for being here, for sharing your message and helping people to step more into that leadership role that, that they're meant to be and to help them to just make a greater impact on this planet. Thanks so much, Cecilia.
Thanks, Linda.
Now we're going to hear from one of our authors, Amy Stevens. Let's hear about her experience working with Action Takers Publishing.
You took the overwhelm out of the whole entire process. You said you set the guidelines, you said how many words to have. And it's like once I sat down and started typing, it just all came out so quickly and so easily. And I loved it. And I had fear to write. And I know about that. I know about that blockage within myself, but it just was so amazing how easy the process was working with Action Takers Publishing.